Hey, I'm Paul Hunter, and welcome to Two Blocks from the White House. Today we're talking about the fact that Donald Trump is now trying to get plaques put up in the National Museum of American History in Washington, D.C. Not just plaques, but warning signs that what is inside that incredible museum contains historical inaccuracies and that people might be better off served by going for versions of American history as approved by the White House. It's an interesting conversation. We got Katie Simpson and as well Jayme Poisson, host of Front Burner on CBC, joining us for this chat. Let's have a listen. Katie, we keep missing each other.
Just ships
Where
passing in the night, Paul.
Where are you?
I am in the lovely capital of Canada, in Ottawa. I'm filling in as host of Power and Politics for the next 2 weeks. So you'll be seeing me from this lovely setup for the next 2 weweeks.
Well, I'm in Toronto hosting the National for a week. I'm in the building where the magic happens for CBC. But look who we have as well.
Hello.
The OG. Are you the OG podcaster, Jayme? Jayme Poisson, host of Front Burner. How are you? And you're in Washington. What's going on?
We have literally switched places. Not really switched places. I could not fill your shoes, but I'm here. I'm in Washington. I'm in Washington for a couple of weeks, kind of filling some vacation backfill. It's a great city. I'm having a great time. Although I miss both of you.
Jayme, you've also been getting out and doing what everybody's supposed to do when they get to Washington, and that is go see some of the Smithsonians.
Yes.
Which is kind of what we're going to be talking about in part today.
I did the Air and Space Museum, which is amazing, by the way. And these museums are all free. That's incredible. And on the weekend, I did the American History Museum. Beautiful. I got to say, I had my 6-year-old with me. My kids are visiting right now, and he's really into history right now. So it felt like kind of a gift to be able to have these exhibits as like a guide to help explain U.S. history to him. He was really into sort of the history of like the railway in America, but we also talked about slavery, Selma, Montgomery, the civil rights movement. It was awesome. It was a great day.
Were the plaques up?
The plaques were not up yet. They're not up yet, but my husband did see a couple of protesters outside sort of talking about how they don't want the plaques to go up and how they don't want history rewritten in the museum.
For Canadians who might be wondering what we're talking about when we say plaques, this is something that the Trump administration has ordered. Donald Trump signing an executive order demanding that plaques be placed in front of certain museums to correct inaccurate information, or at least that's what these plaques are going to state. And of course, as you can imagine, it is deeply controversial.
I mean, Donald Trump is not happy with how in particular the National Museum of American History presents the story of America, right? So there's been a report, there's been a hearing, there's been a previous executive order, much of it aimed at the Smithsonian museums, and this is just the latest in Donald Trump's attempts to change major institutions in D.C. to his liking. So this week we're asking, how is Donald Trump trying to reshape American history and culture?
I'm Jayme Poisson.
I'm Katie Simpson.
And I'm Paul Hunter. We're CBC's Washington correspondents. Sometimes 2 blocks from the White House. One of us is today.
I am. Yeah.
Jayme is. All right, Jayme, I'm going to start with you. You get the first question since you're the newcomer here to our little home. Give us some. You talked a little bit about your walkabouts here in DC. Give us some more of your impressions of the Museum of American History. And for those also who don't know, there was a time in my life when I thought the Smithsonians were one giant big building. It's a bunch of buildings.
Right. And
they all have their different themes, including the American history one. Give us your impressions on that and how it does achieve to tell the story of America.
So there is this wall text in the museum that the Trump administration has actually signaled out and complained about. And I took a picture of it. And I think that it really kind of encapsulates how the museum, or at least parts of the museum, present American history. And so just let me read it to you. It's about the American Revolution, and it asks the question, was it a complete, perfect, sacred event led by a great patriot who, as American children would learn, never told a lie? Or was it part of a wider, unfinished movement for liberty, deeply imperfect, but with sacred aspirations? And this, to me, is kind of the through line for the whole museum. It is exploring America's deeply imperfect project. It presents its founding as an unfinished process where ideals like liberty and equality are these kind of ongoing aspirations, and that people had to fight for, right? And you see this in certain exhibits, the fact that founding fathers enslaved people, the fight for voting rights, what civil rights activists had to endure. There was one part of an exhibit, like my son and I were very interested in, a woman named Daisy Myers, whose family endured like rock throwing crowds and blaring music and telephone threats after moving into a white neighborhood in the 1950s. And this was part of a movement to fight for fair housing. And so my overall impression, and I want to go back again, I'm going to go back again, was that, there are parts of it that celebrate American history. I mentioned the railroads. Also, there's like Elmo and Star Wars and a section on sort of remembering America's role in World War II. But it is also like a complicated reckoning with America's past. I don't know if that's how you would frame it as well.
I say yes, I would. I mean, when I first came to D.C. For this posting 150 years ago or so, what struck me almost immediately was what a celebratory city it is in terms of its history and America's history. History in any country is messy, complicated, often sometimes ugly. And what I appreciated about this place and the museums in particular, and the American History Museum in particular, was that it was good with dealing with those things face on, because you learn from history, and because of what my takeaway was, that because you have a complicated or messy past, can help the future. And it doesn't mean the present is that. It means the country has moved on from that. But the real takeaway was what a celebration of this country the place was, even with its complications and messiness and ugliness in years and decades gone by. Katie, what about you?
Yeah, and I think that the Smithsonian, not just this museum in particular, but it does, it sort of, at least in recent years, has made an active effort to try and include perspectives that have not been included when it comes to major historical events. So you're not just seeing it from one perspective, where something might be celebratory for, one group of people. It may have been extremely challenging for another. And they're trying to bring those perspectives together to try to create a better understanding of what really happened and to consider different perspectives. And it really sort of showcases that in a way that, lets you have a moment to think about it. Like if you go to a museum in DC, I always sort of recommend, when you're going to go in the morning, and then, you're probably not going to get through an entire one, but take the rest of your day to sort of think about it and talk about it. And that's sort of the recommendation I do. Don't overwhelm yourself and just try to cram too much in, because the way these exhibits are set up and the way they're done, you can sort of have a conversation about it after. And I think that's the point, right?
And Katie, I want to ask you about why Trump is so upset about things in a second, but I will just throw in another museum, which is the National Portrait Gallery and the President's Wing. And Jayme, I don't know if you've been there, but I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. And one of the things you walk away from in there is, well, different people have been presidents at different times, and some for good, some for less good, in the minds of some anyway. There's Richard Nixon, there's Bill Clinton, there's Barack Obama. Trump right now, it's a photograph. There's a longstanding thing that you don't have the official portrait while the president is still in office. But next to the photograph of Trump, and he's standing look at the Resolute desk looking very Trumpy. But at the same time, you walk around that gallery and you look at all the presidents who've done different things at different times, and you learn from it. But right now we have Donald Trump, Katie, who is, I don't know how to put it. I don't want to take a side here, but it's like he's not standing for some of the things that he doesn't think are right in these museums, and he's putting pressure on the Smithsonian. What's going on? Why is he so upset?
From President Donald Trump's perspective, what he has said in the public sphere and what his administration has done has sort of challenged the way that the Smithsonian operates. So for Canadians, it's 21 different museums and plus a zoo. And they cover a wide range of American history. But really, Donald Trump sort of, if we want to describe it as a fight or frustration, let's go on a little journey here, as we often do on this podcast. Let's go back to the start of his second term, March of 2025. Donald Trump signs an executive order at the time, and it's called Restoring Truth and Sanity to American history. And essentially, this executive order lays out that there needs to sort of be an examination of what's going on at Smithsonian museums. And he sort of outlines an argument claiming that over the past decade, according to this executive order, over the past decade, there has been a concerted effort to rewrite history, replacing objective facts with a distortive narrative driven by ideology, saying that remarkable achievements in American history are being cast in a negative light, and basically arguing that these museums are perpetrating the idea that America is racist, sexist, oppressive, and that it's flawed. And basically is arguing that these museums are making people feel shame about America or feel guilty about American history. And we need to take a look at, okay, what had happened over the past decade that might make Donald Trump frustrated? Well, over the past decade, we have seen a real reckoning with America's history, particularly around the fight for racial justice. After the murder of George Floyd, we saw a movement in America, and we saw sort of a concerted effort by society to try and address some of the challenges rooted in systemic racism that have been a problem for generations in America. And we saw things like statues in some places removed. That's something that Trump's executive order took issue with. Statues for Confederate generals or Confederate, as they would be described in some parts of the U.S. South as Confederate heroes. And sort of over the past decade, we've seen a concerted effort in some communities to remove some of those symbols because of what they stand for and how people in the community today might feel when you see someone like this being sort of idolized as a hero or what it stands for. Some people have argued that, perhaps some of these things should stay or they should be put in different contexts or what they are. But there was a concerted effort in some American states to remove some of these things because of what they stood for. And those are the kinds of changes that this executive order from 2025 flagged. So a study is conducted looking at what's going on with the Smithsonian museums and more broadly what's going on in society. And then on July 4th of this year, America's 250th birthday, the Trump administration released a 162-page report about what's going on with these museums. Now, I did not read the entire report, but I did read a chunk of it heading into this because I knew we were going to talk about this on the podcast. And it basically makes the argument that the museums, the way it presents American history, is anti-Christian, anti-white, pro-illegal immigration, and pro-transgender rights. All of these things that the Trump administration has sort of used as wedge issues in Donald Trump's political movement. And it's taking issues with that. The report says that that perhaps the plaque should say, or warnings should be listed outside these museums saying, exhibitions in this museum were prepared by people who don't want you to love your country. And so after this report was published, we then got the notification from the Trump administration that plaques are going to be ordered in front of at least one museum, if not more. We're still waiting for details. I've asked the White House for when they're going to go up, but they haven't gotten back to me with any sort of specifics there.
Let's not forget that there are also millions of Americans who are saying, right on. It's
Absolutely.
about time, right?
Very
And
much
Trump
so.
knows
Very
that,
much so.
right? And we call it the MAGA base, whatever the term you want, but the people who are the hardcore Trumpy people, because another aspect to all of this, everything that you said, is that it's effectively being done in the name of Trump, right? Jayme, I wonder when you've been walking around, surely, I don't know if you've been by the Kennedy, I guess it's back to being called the Kennedy Center now. Last time I saw it, the scaffolding was still up. You might have seen Trump's face on the sides of different buildings. It's
There are like several banners that I've seen. Yeah, very like large images of Donald Trump.
People ask, I think Katie and I get these questions all the time. So what does that say to you when you see that in the U.S. Capitol in a way that I can't think of any other president that has done anything like that while in office or after office, I guess, for that matter.
I was kind of thinking about this the other night. I went for a walk in the evening by the Lincoln Monument and then through the Vietnam War Memorial, which is really so beautiful.
It's very moving,
and powerful,
isn't it?
and moving.
Yeah.
And I was like watching. I was people watching, which is great to do.
It's a good place to people watch.
Yeah, and I was just watching these people from like all over the world come here. Lots of different languages being spoken, and clearly tourists, right? People are taking photos, and you have this sense that this city is so central to the image that America projects to the rest of the world. What happens in Washington, is the message or like a very important part of the message that like the world sees. And so is the message, that the African American History Museum, a relatively new museum that kind of grapples with the legacy of slavery, but also of Black achievement. Like you can go there and look at Michael Jackson's shoe, right? Or celebrate Barack Obama. Or is it like these large banners of Trump and like a giant crane coming out of the White House for a UFC match? And
is it the place or is it the president, in other words?
Or is it the president? Yes.
Yeah. What is Washington? Is it the president or is it America?
Yeah.
And I think people would be asking now, or, what should it be?
Or from President Donald Trump's perspective, is America the president?
Exactly. Yeah.
It's important to remember that regardless of where Trump's head is at on this, the people around him in the White House believe all of this is the right thing. Like the inner circle, all of these, not just the stuff we're talking about today, but everything they've been doing, they firmly, strongly believe this is the right path forward for America. So it complicates things. I started to look at like what other presidents have tried to mess about with the Smithsonian, right? And the only one that I could find was Nixon, and that was long after the fact. It's the people who care for the Nixon brand now. Next to his portrait at the Smithsonian, at the portrait gallery in the president's wing, it said that he'd been impeached. We think Nixon was impeached. He wasn't. The articles of impeachment were voted upon by the House Judiciary Committee that passed it on to the House for a vote, but he resigned before the vote came, and he was not technically impeached. So that was corrected. That's a minor thing. It's a truthful correction. You could say they were splitting hairs, but it's true. But that's the only example I could find. And what sets Trump apart, I think, from other presidents in terms of all the things we've been talking about here today is that he's doing all these things everywhere, even in terms of today, the Kennedy Center and the pool and the this and the that. And I'm sure, Jayme, you've seen the National Guard on the streets of D.C. and all the litany of other EOs and things, that executive orders that he's done. And I think that's why people are, when it comes to Trump, are just standing back and saying, what's going on? And when does it stop? How far do you go? And in terms of rewriting or changing the way American history and culture is viewed, he's a president like no other, for good or for bad.
I think I did this interview last year in Front Burner with Brian Stevenson, who is a civil rights lawyer, really incredible guy. He oversaw the creation of the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. And the museum is the country's kind of largest memorial to the history of lynching and racial terror in the United States.
I've been there.
Have you?
It's sobering. Yeah.
I would love
continue.
to go. I hear it is incredible and also devastating and also beautiful. And I think about this interview all the time. It was about this kind of war on the Smithsonian that the Trump administration started waging last year, as Katie so eloquently took us through. And Brian talks about how the real evil was the narrative that was created to justify slavery, which is actually quite a striking thing to say. But his argument is essentially that the violence of slavery was horrific, but because people didn't want to think of themselves as like indecent or immoral, they created this narrative to help them kind of reckon with that brutality, right? Of the brutality that they were inflicting on other human beings, that Black people are less than human, that they are less capable. And his argument is that narrative, it prevailed after the Civil War, right? And it prevailed after the civil rights movement as well. And it takes us, as Katie was talking about earlier, to George Floyd. And I just want to read a quote from him. It was something he said to me that I actually wrote down afterwards. I kind of like keep it with me. You can't go to the doctor and tell your doctor, oh, don't tell me if I have high blood pressure and diabetes if you want to get well. If you're not willing to hear the truth, you're not going to get the treatment you need to get better. And I think the health of this nation, the future of this nation is at stake if we allow this commitment to silencing and erasure and ignorance to prevail. And I tell people, this is Brian talking, I'm not talking about slavery and lynching and segregation because I want to punish America. I want to liberate America. I think there's something better waiting for us. I think there's something that feels more like freedom, more like equality, more like justice, and it's waiting for us. And I think, that's the conflict that this country and this administration is right now. And like, what do you lose when you do not reckon with your history and instead you just celebrate it?
I think that it sort of, this conversation gets back to the heart of the MAGA base. And when Donald Trump says, make America great again, and he's used that to build his brand and to sell a vision to Americans, but making it great, like going back to when? Great. Who is it great for? That kind of thing. And so when the narrative, when Americans start to, have these moments of reckoning where they take a look at the ugly history that exists. And again, this is not a uniquely American problem. This is, name a country that doesn't have an ugly history. This is something that, it's the cliche, unless you learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it. Those kinds of things.
Read the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada.
Exactly. And so, but Donald Trump has built his brand on making it great again and sort of selling this vision of nostalgia. Remember when times were simpler? Remember when all of those kinds of things? They've actually released an ad on social media, saying we come here for the golden age. This is the golden age.
An America that is safer, more secure, more prosperous. And any setbacks that stand in our way simply makes the comeback that much sweeter. Welcome to the golden age.
And when you have a critical lens to history and sort of include perspectives that are not the one that Donald Trump has, but that also millions of Americans have too. Donald Trump is not unique in this. We have to be very clear about that. That it eats away at this vision that Donald Trump has sold to America, and that's why I think he's so adamant about controlling this narrative, because when Americans think critically about this, about including different perspectives, making America great again, well, great for who, and who's included in the greatness, it leads to challenges for him.
Yeah, well, since you raise it, Katie, let's go back to 2017 and let's go to Canada for a moment. And when a great deal of the conversation regards to Canada's 150th that year was the history with residential schools, and that what are we celebrating here? I went up for the July 1st, but I wasn't living in Canada at the time. Can either of you reflect on that, like the degree to which that complicated, like the Canada's past complicated the celebration that summer?
When you were in Ottawa for the celebrations, and I lived in Ottawa at the time for these moments, there's always an attempt to sort of strike a balance between celebrating the achievements of a country, but also ensuring that, you're not turning a blind eye to what has been a very difficult past, right? And it's sort of shaping the way that conversations, particularly when it comes to the way that, the government has treated Indigenous communities and what has happened to Indigenous children for generations, and just how do you reckon and attempt to well, I think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission is sort of leading the way on this, but it's in Ottawa at the time, I remember there being sort of a conscious effort to sort of mark the moment, but also mark the history and the reality of the history. But in the years that followed, I think the way that Canada Day was marked, and flags coming down on Parliament Hill after, I want to say it was after 2020, when the first story started breaking about investigations into unmarked graves at residential schools, those kinds of things. It certainly, Jayme, you were living in Canada. It certainly was changed then as well.
Yeah, it was really I mean, it was really difficult, that conversation. I think it was an important one to have in the country because it was something that we weren't really teaching in our schools, the conditions that a lot of Indigenous people lived through. And it was amazing to me just how many people didn't really have a grasp of, how difficult that history was. And I think all the time about like why I want to do journalism, right? And it is like an attempt to get as close to the truth as you possibly can. Because when people have sort of the facts, I think is less dangerous. I think it's less dangerous. You can't spin. So it's harder to kind of spin other narratives out of it for people to like fit whatever kind of political or ideological project that they want to pursue. The challenge is that we don't stop having it, right?
Let's just get to the truth.
Yeah.
Because the truth is okay.
Yes.
Right? And I think maybe a lesson in all of this, some might suggest, is that it doesn't have to be 100% celebratory. And that's okay in America, it's okay in Canada, because to the person that you're quoting earlier, it's liberating to understand the past. And that's what seems to be lost here, I think people would say. It's important to have those conversations. And then we learn, we liberate, we lift ourselves and move forward.
You might think, we're having an entire conversation here based on the fact that Donald Trump is putting up signs in front of at least one museum, but it's not that. It's this bigger picture conversation about making sure that we do not repeat the mistakes of the past, and the better understanding. And understanding leads to things like empathy, things like that.
Well, on that note, look, that's our episode for today. Jayme, great to have you here. Great to see
guys,
you.
It was a pleasure, really.
Glad
Jayme,
you're holding
so
up
nice
the fort.
To have you.
Yeah. Here's a pro tip. Another Smithsonian exhibit, Starstruck. It's a VR thing. It's not too far from the Bureau. You put goggles on, take your kids, and you explore the universe in a virtual reality kind of way. It's a blast. I did that just a few days ago before I came up here.
Huge pro tip. We'll do that for sure. They're at the, I think, Natural History Museum as we speak, looking at the dinosaurs.
Thanks, everyone, for joining us for this conversation. As always, if you have something you'd like to ask or feedback about what you're hearing, you can send us an email to WashingtonPod, all one word, at CBC.ca. That's WashingtonPod at CBC.ca. Or you can leave a comment for us on Spotify.
And if you like what you're hearing, spread the word, tell a friend about the podcast, and follow us on your favorite podcast app to never miss an episode.
All right, everyone. Thanks. We'll talk again. Ciao for now.
Bye, guys.